seed of Israel's race he ransomed from the fall. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Let every kindred, every tribe on this terrestrial ball to him all majesty ascribe, and crown him Lord of all. To him all majesty ascribe, and crown him Lord of all. Oh, that with yonder sacred throng we at his feet may fall. We'll join the everlasting song, and crown him Lord of all. We'll join the everlasting song, and crown him Lord of all. This is holy ground. We're standing on holy ground.
we're going to do a character study. We've looked at 2 books in the Old Testament recently, 2 characters, obviously, with Ruth and Esther. But now I want to do just more of a character study and not necessarily a textual study. And thought we'd just keep it going and push my luck for a 3rd Old Testament study. But always try to hopefully make it relevant for us in our lives. And that is the book of, or that is not the book of, the life of Elijah. And I'll talk about that in just a second. The distinction between the prophets, the writing prophets and the non-literary prophets. But what do you think about when you think about Elijah? What comes to mind? Anything stand out, or things you think about, or it could be connections to Jesus or the New Testament or the stories? I mean, what do you think about? Do what? Okay, yeah, he was taken up. We'll talk about that. Yeah. What else? Anything you think about? Think about Elijah.
Wasn't he the one that had despair because he was the only one left?
Yeah, he thought he was the only one left. That's right. He wanted to just die in that cave. So it relates to us. Do what? Yeah, that great battle at Mount Carmel. We'll see that incredible encounter. Yeah, Jeff? Saved a what? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, the ravens fed him. Yeah. Oh, there's a raven right there. Good one. What else? Yes, that's the battle of Mount Carmel. That's right. With Baal.
He's the one that prayed to the servant when they were in the city, and the servant was just sure that they were all going to die, and he asked the Lord to open his eyes, and the Lord's army was much bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Elisha, but I think they're connected though.
Yeah, I get those two.
That's all right. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, James.
The reason I think of this is when I was down home, preacher had a sermon about the Mount Carmel.
Uh-huh.
And I think of marshmallows and pretzels because they did it for the kids.
Uh-huh.
And the way they built the altar, they had marshmallows and pretzels.
Oh.
It was very neat how he explained how they did it for the kids. Kept it really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Obviously, go ahead, Dolores. Yes, yeah, the miraculous works what God did through Elijah. That's an incredible story. Obviously, connections to the New Testament. Go ahead.
Was he the one that had the 50s of 50s? Was it Elijah or Elisha that all the men came to him?
I believe that's Elisha again. But well, there's very connected at the end.
Yeah, they needed to make their names.
They need to make their names. I know.
Good name for twins.
Yeah. Yeah. John the Baptist. That's right. Was referred to as Elijah. One would come in the spirit of Elijah, a preparer, a forerunner, one who would clear a path. Go ahead. That's right. Representing Moses the law, Elijah the prophets. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But absolutely, Jesus sees the 2 great figures. Mount Rushmore of the Old Testament characters, Elijah's on there, okay? Elijah's on there. His place is secure, along with Moses. And we could debate about, how many's on Rushmore? 3? 4? Okay, we could debate the other 2. Okay? Some David, some Abraham. Abraham's got to be on there. I'm sorry, I'll just take him off the board. So that leaves one others, but I'll tell you, Elijah's on there. Elijah is on there. And we'll swing back around to that in just a minute. Yeah, Moses is on there for sure. So we've got, when I think about Elijah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Lucy. Transfiguration, yep. When I think about Elijah, and that's really going to be a little bit of the focus in the class at times. I think about somebody who had to stand in the gap who had to stand alone often. And we're going to spend a little more time on the context of we're going to spend a little time on the days of Elijah. You know the song we sing, "These are the days of Elijah." Well, what were the days of Elijah? We're going to talk a little bit about that with the great, exciting background history first class. I know it's so riveting. You just love it when we give all the backstory, right? You could do this. Yes, Robert, we love that. Well, we have to do that. But I think about he stood in the gap. God's people, it was bad. It was a low of lows. I mean, they've had several low moments. And this is going to be one of those periods. And Elijah is called to stand up and stand for God. And wow, was it a challenge. And we'll talk about that here. But that's not unrelated to us, right? More and more, we're called to stand. We're called to stand alone. We're called to stand in the gap. We're called to be go-between a world that seems to be just spiraling towards a Christless hell every day, and more people being ushered into that, and being a light for Jesus. And that's going to take great courage and strength. And so I thought, Elijah is kind of it's a good 1-2 punch to what we've had with Ruth and Esther, and now just looking at his life. All right, so let's look at some of this exciting background story. Okay, this is a good little chart. So at the top is the timeline. You see 950 BC. This is approximately 950 years before Christ. Going to the end of the Old Testament history that we have recorded. The Old Testament history that we have, the book of Malachi, ends around 400 BC. So we got this roughly 600 years. So, of course, the first 3 kings of Israel, right? The kingdom is established. Saul starts off, each of them reigned 40 years. He's not good. David, good king, and he reigns 40 years. His son Solomon takes the throne, and he reigns 40 years, and he dies around approximately 940 BC. Now, something very significant happens at this point. Solomon has a son, Rehoboam, and the kingdom is going to divide. Rehoboam makes a very foolish decision. Remember, they come to him, the people, the advisors, and say, "Hey, look, your father Solomon, he cracked the whip on us. All those building projects that he and his father did, David, how do you think they moved all those stones?" Our backs. I think all the men walked around like this. Because David was tough. And Solomon was tough. And moving all those trees and stones and everything to build the palace and the city of Jerusalem to its highest expansion. They say, "Hey, your dad taxed us and he worked us." And they say, "Lighten it up. If you do, we'll serve you." And remember, Rehoboam says, "Okay, I'm going to take this under consideration." He listens to the old advisors that say what? Go with it. Yeah, hey, you better listen to them. Young advisors say what? You tell them to suck it up, and they haven't seen the worst yet if they don't like it.
Solomon's wrist will be like your waist.
That's right. Yeah. And as a result, a figure named Jeroboam will take, who God initially wants to establish him as the next great dynasty. And so Jeroboam eventually obviously goes into great idolatry and apostasy, and he leads a rebellion. There is a rebellion that takes place in this time that we have. 10 of the tribes in the north will consolidate into a single kingdom. They will be called Israel. So this one, it gets confusing when you're reading this part of the Old Testament. And the kings of Israel and the king of Judah. What's going on? Well, 10 of the tribes in the north form an alliance, and they have established their own worship, their new place of worship. They establish their own monarchy. Jeroboam becomes the first king of the northern kingdom. Rehoboam will continue in the south. There's two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Right? And Benjamin doesn't have a lot to offer. They're the smallest. But the two of the tribes in the south, which is pretty much Judah, is going to attempt to be faithful. And they are referred to as the kingdom of Judah. So you got Israel, Judah, that are going to, this is called the divided kingdom. And so you see right here, this chart here, these are the nations of the world empires, the Egyptians and their height of power, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. We just spent this week talking about Esther, and the Persians are during that time. So here you see this period, northern, southern kingdom. And they will go along for about the northern kingdom will last about 200 years. 213. Kathy, to be exact, right?
That's what I have written down.
Okay.
I assume that's right.
That's right. Sometimes I like to round up or round down, so we're going to round down and say about 200 or 213 years. I like that. Around 722 BC, the Assyrians are now the dominant power on the scene. And where they are, I don't have a map to show you, but their geography, the Assyrians are right on top of the northern kingdom of Israel. And so they start dominating the world, and they are going to take out the northern kingdom in 722 BC. They will wipe them out. They will never be a nation again. Bye-bye. They're done. And so at that point, it's called Judah alone. That's what historians refer to now. The southern kingdom, beginning in 722 BC, will be called the Judah alone. And they will plug along for till about 587 BC. So 722 BC till about 587 BC. And then they will fall by the Babylonians. God raised up the Assyrians to destroy the northern kingdom. God will later on raise the Babylonians up to take the southern kingdom away into captivity. And so that's, in between you've got all these prophets. And so Elijah begins the official era of the prophets. Moses was a prophet. There were prophets before. Remember, Nathan the prophet comes to confront David, you remember? But what's considered kind of the era, the golden age of the prophets begin with Elijah. And that's going to tie into what we said with Kathy. They're going to establish a prophet school of preaching, basically, with Elisha. And so this will begin an era of the prophets. And of course, you have what's called the writing prophets and the other non-writing prophets. So basically you have the minor and major prophets. Major prophets does not mean they're more important than the minor prophets. Minor prophets, Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Micah, all this is major and minor means the length. How big is the book of Isaiah, Jeremiah? It's pretty big. That's why they're major. That's the only reason. And so you have the major, minor prophets, and there you see kind of a timeline of when they fit in this. You have the non-writing prophets. And Elijah and Elisha are the two big ones, particularly Elijah. And so even though Elijah did not write anything, two people mentioned, when Jesus appears at Mount Transfiguration, what two characters appear on the mountain with him? Moses and Elijah. Moses represents the what? The law, the lawgiver. Elijah represents who? The prophets. And so remember how excited Peter was? Oh, it's great to be here. We ought to build 3 booths for each of you, kind of your own little tabernacle to kind of, and while he was speaking, God interrupted him. Boy, yeah. This is my beloved son. Love the King James. Hear ye him. And then it says Moses and Elijah, what? Were gone. Only Jesus remained. We only listen to Jesus. He's the one we hear now from God. And so anyway, I was talking about that with someone who was asking me, this is just not in the church, but outside the church, a couple of weeks ago about why we don't believe in modern day revelation and all that. And I was talking to him about this. We listen to Jesus. He has spoken. Anyway, so Elijah represents the prophets. So he did not write a book, but we have a big chunk of the Old Testament that speak about him. And so, and then of course his protege will follow him, and that is Elisha that will follow. And so this is the history of that timeline. Now let's unpack a little bit more. Okay, during this 213 years, we have 19 kings in the northern kingdom. 0 are good. None of them are good. Absolutely not one. Every single one of them is rotten to the core. The southern kingdom, depending on how you count them, they're going to have a few more, okay? And a few more, I mean like 5, 6, not many. 8, you have 8, Kathy? Okay. 5 or 6, yeah. See, the problem is a couple of them, they kind of good and bad. And so, you got about 8 and so they're going to do a little better out of their 21 kings, but they're not going to do much better. And so the southern kingdom had plenty of evil kings, but they did have a few. During this 213 years of the northern kingdom, it was, and I want you to think about that. We blow by these numbers, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. How long has our nation been around? Let's just use that as a comparison. Let's go, give me some exact. 240 what? 1776? What's the math? 2 what? 240s? Okay, let's call it about 250. Think about all that's happened since 1776. Almost 250 years. Now, think about that same 213 years. Almost the same time. I mean, minus a couple of decades. That's an enormous, vast amount of time, isn't it? What happens over those evil, wickedness, idolatry dominates the day? I mean, there's not a time where you can say, well, at least they get a good president or they get a good king and they turn things around for about 30, 40 years. You don't get any of that. 0. It is a 200-year reign of wickedness, idolatry, godless rebellion, spiritual darkness, indifference to God, abandonment of pure and true worship. Again, 1 Kings 13, I'll just run these by. We get the first man who's the first king, Jeroboam. He becomes the standard bearer. Every bad king is always compared to Jeroboam. He walked in the ways of his father Jeroboam. Incidentally, in the southern kingdom of Judah, when you have a good king, guess who it says he walked in the ways of? David, his father David. And so Jeroboam becomes the standard bearer. In 1 Kings chapter 13, I'll watch my time here. 1 Kings 13, 33 and 34. And I'm sorry, we have to spend more time on this because this isn't as familiar to us. And we've got to set, this is the stage for the class. But after this, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways, but once more he appointed priests in high places from all sorts of people. Anyone who wanted to become a priest, he consecrated. This was the sin of the house of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and to its destruction from the face of the earth. These high places are pagan altars to worship pagan gods. And so right out of the gate, he leads the people into idolatry. Then you get his son, Nadab, and you read about him in 1 Kings 14. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. You read about his son in 1 Kings 16. He's assassinated. I mean, you just go down the list of these kings, and it's just one king after another is just, they assassinate each other. Their murderous, ungodly reign. It just, all of this is flowing. All of this is flowing into the general population. Okay, it takes a while, but eventually it starts just getting into the population. You have these leaders who are pushing this kind of stuff, and eventually it just starts taking hold of the nation. Over in 1 Kings 16, in verse 21, 1 Kings 16 and 21, again, you read about all of this. Omri, and all that he did. Verse 25, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned more than all those before him. I mean, that's pretty bad when you get that kind of statement in this group. He completely followed in the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, committing the same sin of Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. So they aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, by their worthless idols. I mean, it's just idol after idol after idol they start establishing. Then in verse 29 of 1 Kings 16, so be turning over to 1 Kings 16 if you're not over there. That's kind of where we're going to really officially get in a little bit. 1 Kings 16, we're introduced to, beginning of verse 29, Ahab. That's where our Elijah will pick up here. Just 1 Kings 16, 29. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, so you'll often get the chronology where the kings of Judah are during this time as well. Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Samaria becomes the new capital, by the way. So up the northern part, a northern part of Israel is Samaria. They become the northern capital of Israel, and that's where they established the new altars of worship, the new priesthood. They give a new priesthood line, everything contrary to the law of Moses. And so Samaria is kind of the base of operation for the northern kingdom. And so Ahab is here. He did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. So you got another one of these. He's worse than the last guy, and the last guy was the worst. But this guy's worse than this guy. The last guy, it's just, it's telling you how bad it is. Look at this. Verse 31. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also, now a game changer is about to happen. He's going to marry a woman, Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, of Baal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. So now we're introduced to something new, something historically significant happens. He takes a wife, that's not new. He takes a pagan wife, that's not new either. But he takes from an area of the Sidonians. And the Sidonians are on right along the sea there, of the Mediterranean Sea, and they worship in particularly a very vile god named Baal, or Baal, sometimes it's referred to. This is the god of storm, fertility, rain. Basically, this is the God that says, I will produce for the land. I will produce fertility for the people. I will produce fertility in the land with its crops, and I cause the storms to happen. I cause the rain to come. That's the God of Baal. And so Ahab is going to join an alliance with the king of Sidonian, and the way they would often seal their deals of alliances, and this has happened historically, is they'll shake hands and say, now I'd like to give a daughter, and we'd like to exchange a daughter here. And so that kind of joins the two families together, the houses together, when you have two different nations. And so he says, I'd like to give you my daughter, Jezebel. And so, of course, when they got the U-Haul, or the two guys in a truck, or however they moved Jezebel down, as they unloaded the trailer, they start bringing out her gods, Baal. And that injects in Israel something that the likes had not been seen before. She becomes a passionate missionary. She builds immediately a great temple, other houses of worship. She will establish a payroll where she will put 450 prophets of Baal on the payroll of Israel. She will begin to systematically assassinate and kill the prophets of God that are in the land, and so on. And that is the world of Elijah, because Elijah in 1 Kings 17 now, notice 1 Kings 17. It's an incredible introduction in one way. He's introduced simply, now Elijah, the Tishbite in Gilead, said to Ahab. He just comes on the scene. He just arrives. We don't, it's the first time his name appears. It appears out of the blue. We get no introduction. We get no backstory, no genealogy, nothing. He just suddenly appears. And he will play an instrumental role in God's plan. He will be one of, of course, the great heroes in Scripture. And as was mentioned, he's connected to John the Baptist. Jesus, when he cries out from the cross, remember, some of the people think he's calling for who? For Elijah. And we've talked about the Mount Transfiguration. When Jesus asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? They give some really good, impressive answers as far as, and one of them is Elijah. People are saying, you're Elijah. Again, he's at the Mount Transfiguration we mentioned as well. But Elijah, he appears. And that's the world. That's the days of Elijah. In the midst of rebellion, spiritual darkness, no concern for God and the things of God, 213 years of reign of terror will begin during this period. Out of nowhere, we're introduced to this legendary figure, Elijah.
And he immediately puts Baal down. Baal's the
Yeah.
god that brings produce and brings the rain and stuff. He just totally wipes that out.
That's right. And so let me look at, here we go. Up here, Samaria. This will kind of be right, or down here, we'll see, we'll kind of the map of Israel. Here's Samaria. Up along the coast is the Sidonians. Again, that's the alliance. The Tishbite Elijah is over on this side of the Jordan. And so it's a beautiful area. It's a very fertile area. They build terraces along the mountainside. That's where you can get more of the vines and everything. It gets good rain up there. And so Jesus will go up in this area several times. Of course, he'll spend a lot of time up in Galilee, up on the Sea of Galilee. So it's a very lush, beautiful area. And we've introduced to our main characters. A couple of things here as we introduce this again. Elijah is in a time of, he lived with an unshakable belief in God, the presence and power of God, no matter what was happening to him, no matter whatever was happening in the culture. This is a post-Judaism, if you will, culture. The law of Moses is not being followed. It's a time of violence and wickedness and everything. And it looks like God has been defeated and wiped off the map and is no longer, that he's been overpowered, that he's been banished. Doesn't that sometimes kind of eerily feel like sometimes we can feel like today a little bit? I don't want to compare the two as being comparable and the same, because there is still God-fearing people in our land. There is still God-fearing churches, and we have leaders in local and state and even in the federal government who are godly men and women who are trying to. So I don't want to, let's not compare, let's not jump immediately and say we're the same. But don't you at times feel that similarity a little bit? That we are living in sometimes the spirit of Elijah, the days of Elijah? We sometimes wonder, God, where are you at? Where are you being run out of town? Are you being run out of our town, our city, our state, our country? It's often described that we live in a post-Christian culture. That is, God no longer plays a role in shaping public opinion. And I think that's generally true when you look at all statistics from social scientists, when you poll people. By the way, that's even from people who claim to be Christians. The research shows when they really put to it and say, how much does your Christian faith really, really, really shape your decisions? It's minimal. It's minimal now. That's among churchgoers, okay, according to Barna and all of their research. So we definitely are living in a post-Christian. The first concern that people have, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, is not grounded in an understanding of God and the divine and the spiritual. That is not the first concern in our culture and hasn't been for a while. And so Elijah, his life reminds us God's looking for people who will stand in the gap, who will make a stand for Him, who will not forget His presence and His will. Go ahead. Does anybody have a... Oh, we're reminded of that in his life. And we're also reminded that we need to be bold in the midst of godless culture. And I don't mean bold as in go around yelling at people. You bad people! I'm not talking about that kind of bold. We need to stand out. We need to stand out. We need to live so boldly and distinctly from the culture that it's obvious. You know, one of the things I wonder about Elijah is his name. I wonder about his parents. Anytime you get El, you know, one of God's names, Elohim, right? Elijah's name means my God is Jehovah. My God is Yahweh. I almost wonder, did his parents stand out? Were they trying to hold the line in the name that they gave him in a reminder that Elijah, we want our son to stand out, to not blend in, to not go along to get along, to not be reluctant, to not be paralyzed. I just wonder about that. But regardless, Elijah has that. He has that kind of faith. He has that kind of character. Now, someone mentioned earlier, he's going to get discouraged to the point that he wants to give up and die. So he's not perfect. He's going to struggle, just like we all do. Runs from Jezebel, absolutely. And so he has his difficult days. But I think that, again, it shows us that we need to have bold faith in the midst of a godless culture. That's where we find ourselves often in this society that we live in, more and more, the turning of a... And then I would think it's also going to tell us, and we talked a little bit about this with Esther, God uses ordinary people to make a difference in our world. God, incidentally, doesn't raise up an army to defeat Ahab. He calls one person. One man. He calls one person. An obscure man. We don't know how old he is. We don't know his family is. We don't know anything about him. A Tishbite. They're lost to history. We really don't know. Scholars do not know about them. They're somewhere in the region of Gilead. It's on the northern part, the eastern side of the Jordan River. We just don't know anything about them. He doesn't tell us anything noteworthy. God doesn't need noteworthy people. He doesn't need great, rich people. I mean, look at Moses. You know, Moses at 40 thought he would lead God's people from a position of power. What was Moses at 40? A son of what? Raised as a son of what? Pharaoh. And I'm going to do this now, and I'm going to go out and deliver my people. And Stephen tells us in Acts 7, he gives us some insight, Moses thought God would raise him up in that moment when he killed the Egyptian. Moses thought, I'm in a great position to do something. I've got power, I've got some privilege, I've got some... God couldn't use him. God couldn't use him. God often calls the unqualified. He'll wait 40 more years when Moses is 80 and now broken down. He's an old man. He works for his father-in-law on the backside, which is never a good side of anything out there in the desert.
So he went from being arrogant to being humble.
Yes.
I thought Moses was the most humble man, but at 40 he wasn't.
That's right. Well, I'm just a widow. I'm just a single person. I'm just a student. I'm just a regular guy that works at a factory or in a warehouse, or I answer phones in an office. How many times do we start using that language about ourselves? Well, I'm nobody. I'm not really. That's really all who God uses. Really? He uses people to do His will who otherwise the world would say, that's who you're going to use? I mean, what did they say about Jesus Himself? Some of His own, the disciples of John, when they found out He's from Nazareth. What? Can anything good? They just thought Nazareth was... Now, I'm not going to name any towns. All right? I've done that one time, and boy, I got myself in trouble. That was years ago. I was like, I didn't mean to imply, but I just named some... I'm not going to do it. Now, I'm not going to do it. Podunk, Arkansas. There you go. Yeah, I did, Tony, so I kind of got a little bit on that. I'm just trying to keep it out of Oklahoma. But we think, who am I? Elijah was unknown from a backwater place. God will call him to make a difference. God is still looking for Elijahs. He really is. And I love the statement later on in James, when James will talk about prayer. And it'll say, Elijah prayed to God and it rained, and he prayed to God that it would not rain, and it didn't. And he says, he was just a man, just like us. That's who God uses. Ordinary, everyday people to make a difference. And I think we're going to see that in this study, and that's what I want us to be encouraged in. And so what we're going to do is kind of start unpacking the story of Elijah and some of those lessons that we learned from some of his life. But I think this was kind of just sets the stage for the background, the backstory, and how dark it was. So we'll get right into it and kind of hopefully get something a little more in the text next week. But it'll be a good study, I think. So we'll pick up there.
What a song of delight in the city so bright will be wafted neath heaven's fair dome. How the ransom will raise happy songs in His praise when all of God's singers get home.